Hello, everyone. This is a special August 2022 meeting of the Old Astoria Neighborhood Association. And we have a special guest who's going to do a presentation on redistricting. Redistricting is changes in the borders of election districts based upon the last census, which showed any changes that happened over the last 10 years. In terms of population and distribution. So this is very important. The redistricting of the city council is coming up soon. There are public hearings coming on, and we're doing a workshop here so you know exactly what's going on. This is very important. If you remember last June, we had a primary with the candidates for the brand new New York State Senate District 59. Which was created, again, because of redistricting at the state level. So there will be a lot of changes with this new one. It's great. Everybody should give their input. Before we begin, too, there's three subjects I'd like to bring up, which are important this summer. First of all, the mayor announced an initiative to change the pickup times for garbage because of the rat infestation issues that are plaguing the whole city, frankly. However, if instituted, these are going to cause a lot of issues for residences and for businesses. So sure would love your input. They're going to be changing the time you can put out garbage for pickup the next morning from 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 p.m. if it's in cans and 8 p.m. if it's in bags. So if you have thoughts on that and how it's going to affect your business or your building, please send us an email to feedback@oana-ny.org. Also, if you look in chat, there's a link to the article on our website where you will get further information on this. Next, again, we're looking for feedback on 21st Street. As you know and been following, the DOT is changing the configurations of the lanes. They're changing the turns. They're creating a one lane of through traffic and creating a bus lane. It's being instituted now. So again, the same thing. If you have any comments or thoughts towards this, please let us know via feedback@oana-ny.org. This is a very big quality of life issue. It's very important. This is the main artery that we have through Old Astoria. So we definitely want your input. And lastly, again, the DOT and the MTA have created a whole new bus redesign network for Queens, first time in many, many years. And there's two public hearings left. There were a series, one on the 16th from 3 to 7 in Forest Park, and the second on the 23rd from 4 to 8 at Roy Wilkins Park in Jamaica. So if you want further information on that, again, there's another link in the chat. So take that information down and please make your voices be heard, participate. Okay, so again, we're having a presentation, a workshop on redistricting. And we have with us from Citizens Union, Dan Kaminski. So Dan, I'd like to turn it over to you and take us to school. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Richard. And thank you to everybody here. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I will say as a caveat, I am a little under the weather, so I hope I don't have a coughing fit or anything during, but I think I should be able to get through it just fine. So I'm going to share my screen here. Just give me one moment. Okay. All right. So as Richard mentioned, my name is Dan Kaminsky. I'm here from an organization called Citizens Union. We are a good government group that's been doing accountability, transparency, ethics, issues of voting and democracy for 125 years. And we've also worked on redistricting for decades. In this cycle, we're not only trying to advocate for a fair and open process, but we're doing the civic engagement piece where we're coming to communities and working with people and hopefully giving them the tools, giving you the tools to be able to plug into the process yourself. So that is why I'm here. As Richard said, You've probably followed the state process, or you may have seen it in the headlines. And even if you haven't, that's okay. That process was a disaster in just about every way. I'm happy to talk about what went wrong there, but I want to be really clear that today I'm only talking about city council, right? So that process for at least for now is done, and now the city council is being redistricted, and this is actually the critical moment in that process. And I'm here to kind of catch you up to speed if you haven't been paying attention on how it works, what it is, how to get involved. So those three things are really kind of my central goals for today in terms of what I'm going to talk about, what it is, why it matters to you, and how to engage in the process. A little deeper than that, though, I will also I'll also go over the criteria that map makers use to draw the maps. I'll go over how to build your own maps. I'll go to how to build an effective testimony. I'll look at maps. We'll look at data, and we'll kind of get into it together. So if there's anything that you want to ask about, feel free to drop it in the chat. I'm very responsive to questions, although with StreamYard, the program being used, I can't see chat while I'm in screen share mode. So I may only get to it once in a while, but please ask anything you want, and I'll happily help you really however I can. So starting at the most basic level, what is redistricting? Richard kind of gave the definition for me, so we can breeze through this pretty quick. But it's the process of drawing new political boundaries, and it happens every 10 years after the census happens. And it's new boundaries are drawn to take into account the population and the demographic changes that occurred over the last 10 years. So the current lines are what we see on the right of the screen. There are 8 rules. When the commissioners draw new maps, there are 8 rules that these commissioners have to follow. To be very clear, this is a different process run by a different set of rules and run by a different commission than the state process. So everything that you saw at the state process, we don't expect that to happen here. Totally different. Kind of separate those out from in your mind. So I want to go through a couple of these rules just to give you a feeling for both why it matters and how the commissioners are looking at the maps, and how, if you testify, you should be thinking about your district as well. So I'll go through them one by one. I've separated them out 4 by 4. So the first 4, the ones on the screen right now, the commission has to follow. There's no wiggle room here. The second set of 4, which I'll bring up soon, the language in the charter is something like as much as reasonably possible. So the commissioners don't have to follow it. They should follow it, and they should follow as much as they can, but they're not required to follow. So again, going one by one here. One person, one vote. So this is the first rule. It's kind of the major rule, if you want to think of it like that. And the idea is that each district should have roughly equal representation, right? So just hypothetically, imagine if one district had 1 person and another district had 1 million people. Obviously, the level of power afforded to that 1 person is a lot more than those 1 million people. And so with that basic kind of hypothetical in mind, each district should have about the same number of folks in it. So to get that number of people, you take the number of how many people are in the city, and you divide it by how many districts there are. So in the case of New York City, we have 8.8 million people. This is the largest our city's ever been by a pretty significant amount, actually. We grew something like 630,000 people over the last 10 years. And we have 51 council districts. And that's not changing, right? That's in the charter. So when you divide 8.8 million by 51, you get an ideal population of about almost 173,000 people. But it's not expected that each district has exactly that number. A 5% deviation from that number is allowed. So what that means is the difference between the biggest district in New York and the smallest district in New York can't be more than 8,644 people, right? That's the boundaries in difference in each district. It used to be 10% deviation, and Governor Hochul just in October signed into law 5%, right? So now let me pull up a citywide map. So here we're seeing some of the population changes that occurred over the last decade, right? And when we take that 173,000 number, 172 plus thousand number, you see that certain districts, so Staten Island, for example, is underpopulated, right? They have way less than that ideal population size. And certain districts are way overpopulated, right? We see districts throughout Brooklyn and Manhattan are overpopulated, right? So this is the citywide trends, I should say. And something to just zoom out and consider is that we grew by 630,000 people and we have less wiggle room, right? It used to be 10%, now it's 5%, right? So the more people and less deviation means that almost every line in the city is going to have to change. Many, many lines in the city is going to have to change, and some pretty drastically, to accommodate a lot more people and a lot less wiggle room, right? So these maps will be potentially quite different than the maps we've been living under for the last 10 years. What I want to do is jump out just for a moment of this slideshow and bring up the census data. So this document I'm pulling up here is the census data from 2020, broken down by council district. And so I believe everybody on this call will live in Council District 22. Feel free to type into the chat if you don't, and I'm happy to pull up information from other districts that are surrounding. But we see that the 2020 census count has CD22 at 159,000 people. That is pretty underpopulated, right? So that's almost 14,000 people, give or take, under that ideal population. So that means that Council District 22 is going to have to grow by 14,000 people, right? Put another way, 14,000 people are going to wake up, 14,000 people plus or minus some, because again, the deviation, are going to wake up and without having moved, they will be drawn into a new district and represented by a new individual, right? And so that is inherently political, or I should say has inherently political consequences, right? How you're represented, all of it really does matter. And so ideally that comes from District 22, right? Because now you all, people in District 22 should be the ones to say, oh, let's unite in this part of the district to grow this boundary to unite whatever community, or, let's bring in population here or there to make certain neighborhoods whole, or however, right? But ideally that's coming from the people of District 22, which is again why I'm here to get you all the tools you need to engage in the process. So, okay, that was the first criteria, probably the most confusing potentially criteria. Moving on to the second one. This is from the Federal Voting Rights Act, right? So arguably one of the most important things to come out of the civil rights movement from a legislative standpoint is this act, the Federal Voting Rights Act, which forbids new maps to dilute the voting power of racial and language minority groups, right? So what that means practically is, let's say these red, pink blocks here are a protected group under the Voting Rights Act. A new map could not do what you see on the right, because that would split up that group between many districts. And by doing so, it would dilute that group's voting power, right? So commissioners should be drawing maps to keep different groups together, specifically racial and language minority groups, I should say, together, to ensure they have maximum voting power, to ensure they have the opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. Now, something important to say about the Voting Rights Act is that one of the the core of that bill was this idea of preclearance, which meant that jurisdictions with a history of discrimination couldn't act unilaterally to implement new maps. They had to, and changes to their voting apparatus, they had to send them into the Department of Justice to pre-approve them, pre-clear them, before they could take effect. This probably won't surprise too many people on this call, but New York City does have a history of discrimination in its map making. And so because of that, every decade we'd have to send in our new maps to the Department of Justice for them to approve it before they could take effect. And in addition to sending them new maps, we had to send them a 500-page document, which I put the front page of on the screen here, proving that the process by how they came to those decisions was non-discriminatory, in addition to the maps themselves being non-discriminatory. In 2013, in what was one of now a very long string of pretty disastrous Supreme Court decisions, the Supreme Court struck that preclearance requirement. Now, again, this 2013, so this is the first cycle we don't have to do preclearance, which certainly from an advocacy standpoint concerns many groups. And we're still pushing for them to still submit this document to the city, proving that the lines are non-discriminatory, and the process by how they came to those lines also non-discriminatory. That's the second criteria. The next few are a lot simpler. Contiguous districts, right? So if a district crosses bodies of water, it has to be connected somehow, tunnel, bridge, ferry, etc. And crossover districts, which this is not currently relevant to you all, and I don't think it will become relevant, but you should know it just in case. If a district crosses over county boundaries, so each district should be within the purview of a single county. If it has to cross over county boundaries, that can only happen one time per set of 2 boroughs. So in the proposed map, which I'll go over in a second, the 26th district crosses over to Manhattan. That's the only time Queens and Manhattan can be connected. Another example here, Council District 8 has Bronx and Manhattan. No other district can have parts of those 2 boroughs together. So those are the 4 required rules. These next are, as I said, as much as possible. And they're as much as possible in order of listed on the screen. So that first one, keeping neighborhoods and communities of interest intact, is the most important, followed by, as in order of priority. So I'm going to spend a minute here on communities of interest. Just read this definition verbatim. So a community of interest is a neighborhood, community, or group of people who have common policy concerns and would benefit from being maintained in a single district. Another way of understanding a community of interest is that simply a way for a neighborhood to tell, a community to tell its own story about what neighbors share in common and what makes it unique when compared to surrounding communities. It is defined by local members. So what I think stands out to me about this definition is, unlike the last set of criteria, which have very strict parameters on what is and is not allowed, this is the opposite, right? This is the commission saying, hey, you're the expert in your community. You tell us what is your community, and we'll do our best to keep it together, right? So I'll give a couple common examples of what you typically hear in testimonies, but what I think the point should be is you can throw these examples out the window because you're the expert in your community and you are the one to best define it. So some common examples, socioeconomic status, right? Let's say you and your neighbors all share a similar class background and you want to ensure that everybody in that area remains together so you can advocate for the issues of that class background most effectively on the council. Let's say you're a renter and you want all the renters around you to be maintained in a single district. So issues of, affordability and other housing issues, you have the best opportunity to elect a candidate that has those issues in mind. Transit issues are a common one. School boards, right? Often school districts are split up into many council districts, and people want the entirety of their school district to be in the purview of a single council member to most effectively advocate for it. Religious institutions, commercial strips, all of these things, whatever you geographically define as your community, and especially if you can define it, you can connect it to a policy concern that needs advocacy on the council, that's your community of interest. And again, that's what you advocate for. So I hope that makes sense. It is sort of an intentionally vague definition to leave incredible amounts of wiggle room for people to define themselves what their communities are. So it is notoriously vague, but I think honestly that's a good thing. Now, I'm going to give a quick visual example of why this matters, why this can matter to a community. I will say ahead of time, I'm not a graphic artist, so I apologize if this design is not particularly visually appealing, but hopefully, it'll still get a point across. So let's just say that this square is New York City. And let's say these black lines are the district lines. And let's say this gray circle is your community of interest, whatever that is. Let's say it's your school community, right? And let's say these other circles are other communities of interest. So if this were the map and these were the 4 districts, whoever gets elected to represent this red square is probably going to take into account the concerns of these communities of interest far more seriously than they will this gray circle's community of interest, right? You're off to the side, you represent, you're off in a corner of the district, you represent far fewer voters. And even if they cared and were aligned on the issue, the other communities will be far louder and represent far more significant voting blocks. And so that member will have to pay more attention to them. That could theoretically mean less legislation, less advocacy, less funding, less media attention, all of which could make whatever the issue that you're concerned about worse, right? So where redistricting comes into play is it allows us to do this, right? And so let's just say, this was the new proposed map. Well, now your community of interest, whoever's representing that red square, is going to have to take into account the concerns of your community of interest because you're right in the heart of the community or of the council district. You represent a very significant number of voters. And so that could ultimately yield whatever better results. So hopefully that makes that clear. That's that first criteria of the as much as possible. The second one I'll go over, and then what we're going to move on, is keeping neighborhoods together. So I'm going to pull up here this map of New York City from the Population Fact Finder tool, a wonderful, wonderful tool that's worth clicking around on. If you click neighborhood tabulation area, it's going to split us up into neighborhoods. And then I'll click on New York City council districts. Right, so now we see Council District 22 up here. Now, just looking around, this doesn't seem to be a huge issue for your neighborhood. Your district. Other districts have it worse, but there are definitely neighborhoods that are cut in half, it looks like, right? So if I see Woodside North here, the district is, that neighborhood's kind of cut down the middle. Jackson Heights also kind of cut in a peculiar way. And those are the two main ones. Oh, and then I guess Old Astoria, where you are, there's a weird line right on the western edge from what I'm seeing. I'm not the expert in the district, you are, but just looking at the map here. Right. And so sometimes I hear from communities that this is not favorable, right? They really prefer having one council member have the entirety of their neighborhood in their purview to get most effective advocacy, right? So this is the sort of thing that we're looking at. And keep in mind, the context of your district is you need to grow, right? You need to grow by, I think, 15,000 people, give or take. And so that gives you an opportunity to start looking at where either communities of interest or neighborhoods are cut off in weird ways, so that you can theoretically unite them and bring the entirety of the neighborhood or the entirety of the community into the purview of the council member. Okay, and then the final, so we've gone over all the criteria that I think is relevant. It needs to be compact, but that doesn't seem to be a huge problem for 22, and there can't be gerrymandering. Again, we'll skip those for time's sake. The final thing I'll say, and my guess is for a club like yours, I won't really need to go into this, but I do like to say that who you're represented by on city council really does matter, and how the lines are drawn will affect who you're represented by. So just a quick kind of go over is council members. I like to say, look out your window, and virtually everything you're seeing is affected by your council member, whether that's the trash, as Richard was talking about before, and the rats and all those issues, whether that's the streets and potholes, whether that's, schools and issues of policing and, really you name it, and everything within your built environment. Neighborhood issues really are under the purview of the member. People are very invested in state and federal politics. I get that. But if we're talking about neighborhood issues, I would say that few people have more power to really affect the quality of life and how it feels to live in your neighborhood than your council member. So things of land use, right? They get discretionary funding, millions of dollars to spend in your district. They're the legislative body of New York. Of New York City. They provide a key role in budget, and they provide constituent services, right? So all really crucial processes. Now I want to jump over to the current map. So now I'm switching, now that you know the criteria, right? Now you know how the commission is looking at this. I want to switch over to what they've done, right? So they proposed their first map, and based on the criteria I just laid out for you. The website I just pulled up is New York City Redistricting U, which is a really useful website to be able to compare old maps and new maps. So I worth playing around on for sure. So first, I'll just show you how it works. This scroll button at the very top allows you to compare what the old lines look like. Right, so I'll click on Council District 22. We see it's highlighted in blue. This is how the old lines were, and then what their first proposal is. So if I scroll to the right here, New York City Council preliminary plan. So this is what they're proposing to do currently. Before I get into what they're proposing, I will just show a couple other quick features of the website. The left side has if I click the district, the kind of profile of that district under the old lines. And then on the right, it has the profile of the district under the new lines, right? So again, you needed to grow by 14,000 people, which they did, right? 159,000 was the old population. Now you're at almost 174,000 people. It has demographic information, right? So this district was 49% white, and now it's 45% white, right? So it takes into it and has the breakdowns. It has other metrics, right? So does it, is it a crossover district? Is it compact, et cetera? It has voter analysis, which can be interesting to look at. And if you click on legend, it also can show you all sorts of really cool information. So if you click on neighborhood tabulation area, it splits the district up into neighborhoods. You can click on, subway routes. You can click on demographic information, right? So now it's showing you what population is where in that sort of Voters' Rights Act mentality of making sure to keep groups together that are protected under that act. So those are the features of the website. Whoopsie. Now let me I'll click this. I'll keep it on. But so let's look at just the old versus the new. I will. So the old lines, and I'm going to be value neutral here. You're the experts in the district, so you say what you think works or doesn't work. So really what they did to grow that 15,000 people is, the blue line, again, where it used to end, is extend the districts at the southwestern border into Queensbridge and, adds more of Ravenswood, et cetera. So that's the biggest change that I'm seeing. There's also a couple blocks, let's zoom in a little bit, in Astoria Central that gets added, a block that gets cut out as well. But it seems like the biggest change to happen is in these neighborhoods at the southern end of the district, which are now included. They were taken from 26 and moved into 22. And 26, if anyone's on the call from that, has very significant changes. One of the most significant changes in New York City, which it used to be like that, an entirely Queens district. And this first plan, they've proposed extending it into Roosevelt Island and onto Sutton Place in the Upper East Side, right? So big changes to happen there. I encourage you to play around with this more and look really more deeply into the dynamics of the district. That was just kind of a top line overview to show you what the new map looks like. So now let's go over how this is all going to roll out. So firstly, I've been saying the commission and who's drawing the lines and all of that. So who are they, right? Who are these people that are tasked with drawing these lines? So the commission is made of 15 people. 7 of those people are appointed by the mayor. 8 people were appointed by city council. Of those 8, 5 were appointed by the Democratic Conference, really just the speaker, but it's a full vote of the conference, and 3 were appointed by the Republican Conference, again, mainly the minority leader, but still the conference votes. Of those 15 elected their own chair, a guy named Dennis Walcott, who especially for Queens folks may be familiar because he's currently the head of the public library, the Queens Public Library. So they're off and running. So how this process goes. So the preliminary hearings happened at the end of June and the beginning of July. Those preliminary hearings were an opportunity for New Yorkers to tell the commission what they wanted in their maps. And I will say, Astoria, people from Astoria really did not engage in those hearings, right? So I think only 1 or 2 people from Astoria, I have the data to the left here, only 1 or 2 people testified during those hearings on what the district should look like. You can compare that to, let's say, other places in Queens, just a bit over in districts 25 and 26. Literally, I think 100 people testified for those districts, or Bensonhurst, 100 in South Brooklyn, 170 people testified there. So currently, Astoria hasn't really engaged in the process. So anyway, that was the first round. Based on that hearing and based on all the criteria I showed you before, the commission published its first draft maps, which is what I just showed you at Redistricting and You. Right now is this 30-day window for New Yorkers to contemplate if those maps work for us and do exactly what we're doing right now, really kind of getting into it and kind of thinking about whether it works or not. And then hearings begin starting next Tuesday. And the Queen's hearing actually is in Astoria, and it's August 16th. So let me pull up the meeting dates, and I believe Victor dropped it in the chat as well. But here are highlighted the meeting times and meeting locations. So these hearings, all the commissioners will be there. And the whole goal is to get you out. So to those hearings. So these are, again, the five. The Queen's one is Tuesday, October 16th from 5:30 to 9 at the Museum of the Moving Image. If you can't make it to that Queen's hearing, it is entirely okay. You can testify at any other of the borough hearings, right? So if you can only make it to the Brooklyn hearing, that's the only date you're free, it is totally fine for you to get your voice in then. Each hearing is remote and in person. So if you can make it in person, great. If you can't, testifying remotely is totally fine. If you need language interpretation, when you register to testify, and I believe Victor will put in the registration link to sign up to testify. When you're registering, there will also be a way to fill in that you need translation or any accessibility accommodations, anything of that nature can all be filled in when you're registering. So those are the hearings, and this is this round, and it's happening right now. And I would say it is the most critical part of the process so far. So after those hearings, the commission will have a month to kind of contemplate, synthesize, digest what we all just told them. And a month after that, they'll submit their maps to city council. They don't have to make changes based on what New Yorkers say, but often they do. Historically, they have. So a month after, they'll submit the maps to city council. City council has 3 weeks to accept or reject the maps. If they don't do anything, the maps are automatically accepted. And by early October, this process is over. And if that happens, if they're accepted or council doesn't do anything, that means that this August hearing will be the only time you have to engage in the process. If city council rejects the maps, which to be honest, I think there's a strong possibility because the speaker has publicly come out against them, then it would trigger a second round of hearings, which would happen in the fall. And so there would be, the commission would come out with a second plan. There would be another round of hearings. And then by February 7th, the commission has to submit its plan to the city clerk. And if you notice here, I say city clerk. So what's really crucial about this process is that unlike at the state process, where legislators took control of the process themselves, in this process, the city council has no authority over the final maps. They can't change it, they can't alter it, they can't reject it, they can't do anything. As long as the commission votes to go forward with their map, that's the new map, and council has zero ability to change that. And from a structural standpoint, we really like that because the ones getting elected in districts should not be the ones drawing their districts, because that will lead to all sorts of politicization, right? So there's at least some structural independence at this council level that we did not see happen at that state level. And again, that was a whole mess. So February 7th is the deadline to submit it. And then right away, petitioning starts and the council primary happens that June. So that's the full process. Now, usually a council term is 4 years. If you notice this time it's a 2-year term, two 2-year terms because of this, right? So council members will have to run in their new districts essentially right after they get implemented. Okay, now let me move on to mapping. So that's kind of how this all is going to work. Now we're going to get into the second half of how will you engage, right? So our goal here is for you to plug into this process. So mapping, we hope that you will draw your own map, And we hope that because it is one thing to say to the commission, please keep my neighborhood together, please keep my district together, et cetera. It's another thing entirely to show them exactly what you want, right? It's another thing to say, I'm from Astoria, and this is what the Astoria district should look like, right? That is a far more powerful testimony. And you're much more likely, if you give them that evidence, if you show them exactly what you want, to get what you want, right? So usually when I talk about mapping, the eyes kind of glaze over. And I do understand it can feel overwhelming, but this is actually a really user-friendly mapping tool that doesn't need to be super complicated. So I hope to, I'll just show it to you briefly, but I hope that you'll play around with it and see that it really can be user-friendly. So the first thing I'll start with, and the site, and I believe Victor is going to put it in the chat as well, but is districtr.org/tag/New York City 2022. This is the commission site that they've published for us. So if you scroll down under Start Drawing, if you click this purple box, it's going to give you a blank map, right? So let's say you don't want to worry about all 51 council districts. You just have your council district that right? So I'm going to scroll in here. So if you go up top, you click this paintbrush, it's going to give you 51 different colors. If you hover over any color, it's telling you what district that color should be. So this is 22. So I'll click it. And this paintbrush size is, how big do you want to paint? So is 1, you're just going essentially precinct block by precinct block. I'm going to do a little bigger just for ease of use here. So, and I just want to say I'm not recommending the map I'm about to draw. I'm going to do this totally unintentionally, but just to kind of show you how it goes. So let's say I just start painting here. If you notice, there's a population counter on the bottom right there. And so it's showing me, okay, I'm at 127,000. Now, again, keep in mind that ideal population is 173,000, give or take, with a 5% deviation. So you want to be kind of right around there. So let's just say, okay, great, I painted, and obviously you'll do this more intentionally than I'm doing it. But let's say that's what you painted and you're at the 170,000 mark and you feel really good about what you painted. I know Rikers Island will be in there, but anyway. Okay, so then from there, great, you're done. You can click Save. And then what's going to pop up on the screen is Share to Gallery. If you click that, that'll get automatically sent into the commission. And now the commission will be able to see, okay, great, this person from Astoria is recommending this is what that district should look like. The other option you have is if you click this link, if you copy it to your clipboard and then submit it in your testimony, they can access it that way. That is your unique link. And even if you make other changes, it'll automatically update to that link, right? So that's option 1. Oh, the other thing you can do, so that's population, which again, we said was kind of like the major criteria. But the other ones, if you click data layers, firstly, if you click city council districts of 2012, it'll put on the lines of what the current districts are. And that may be helpful just to kind of give you a guiding line of, okay, well, what's it been for the last 10 years? The other, if you see demographics here, if you do population by race, if you want to, if that's what you're thinking about and you want to keep a certain group together, let's just say I click on Hispanic population. It'll show you where in the district that population is if you're trying to ensure really that everybody from that group remains together. And then evaluation, yeah. So, and again, I'm doing this kind of quick, but hopefully enough to give you at least a starting place. The second thing to show you is this red square. So let's say you don't have it in you to draw the full district. You don't really care about your full district. You just know that your community, let's say your church community or your school board community, really needs to remain whole together in one district. It can't be cut off, but the rest of what happens, you care a little bit less about. So similar idea, you come in with this paintbrush, and let's just say that, you live here, wherever, and you're saying that this part of the district really can't be split up. That's the main thing that you want to say. Your community of interest really can't be split up. And so you can just paint this little section and say, this is my community. Put in, describe it, write your name, okay, church community or whatever it is. and then describe what that community is and why it's important, and save that and send that into the commission, right? So now it's not the whole district, it's just the community that you're saying needs to be kept whole. Finally, if you see under sample plans, this is their draft proposal, the commission's first draft of their proposal. And so let's say you generally like it, or even let's say you really dislike it, and you want to work from there and make changes to what they're proposing. So you can do that as your starting template too, right? So here again, it shows you the full map. I'm zooming into Astoria, and again, you hover over the color. It shows you which color. And let's just say I'm really upset about how they did this, and I want to add in some parts over here. And again, I'm doing this pretty randomly here. So I would start clicking around. And again, if you see right now down here, District 22, now we've added population, and now we're over. This line here is the overpopulation. So then I would need to consider, okay, well, we've taken from District 26. So how can we, kind of swap populations, if you will, or, add in population to 26 and reduce population from 22. And it's a big jigsaw puzzle, right? And so if you do it this way, and you'll see right now that, okay, the population from 26 is raising and the population from 22 is decreasing. So that's the quick overview on how to do mapping using their tool. Again, once you start playing around with it, it'll, I think, feel somewhat intuitive. And if not, please email me, and I'm happy to get into a more detailed explanation of it for you. Okay, and then the final, second of last thing before we jump over to questions is elements of an effective testimony. So, we want to, if you've testified before, if you're old pro at testifying, you can totally disregard this section. There's no one right way to testify. So we just wanted to give folks a structure. This doesn't, this certainly is not the only structure, but just a way to begin framing your testimony so that you know how to think about it. So from what the commission has said and from our perspective, really, if you answer 4 questions, we think you have an effective testimony. So these 4 questions are: who are you? What's the issue? Why is it an issue? How should the issue be resolved? So again, we think if you answer those 4, you can write those down if that's helpful. We think you have everything you need for this testimony. So let's do each one a little bit more in depth. So in terms of who, you want to say your name and you want to say where you live. And that can feel uncomfortable for people, but keep in mind, this is a geographic exercise, right? And so you want to root yourself in community. You want to say, I'm from Old Astoria. I've been here for 20 years or 3 years or 60 years, or I'm born and raised here or whatever, because that roots you in your community and really makes you someone, okay, clearly this is someone who we should pay attention to because they're rooted in their neighborhood. Then move to personal background. This just keep brief. You only get 3 minutes, so you'll really want to just say whatever's relevant. And then organizational affiliation. So at the very least, you're all affiliated with Old Astoria Neighborhood Association, but any others. And again, you're doing that just to help kind of credentialize you, to add weight to your testimony, just to indicate to the commission, okay, this is someone who's, we really need to pay attention to. And moving on to what? Okay, so, we know who you are. Why are you here, right? What's the main point? So here you'll want to say, let's say the main point is that you think whatever part of the district should be united. That, let's say, the current map splits up my community of interest into multiple council districts. And I'm here because I want to ensure that my community of interest is all in one council district. Or let's say you really like the old map. The commission has to know that. I think oftentimes, groups only come out if they're unhappy with something. But if you're happy with something, the commission needs to know that, because otherwise they could change it based on what other groups wanted, right? So if you really like the proposed map, or if you really like the old map and dislike the proposed map, they need to know, and they need to know why. Or let's say the new map removes an important institution, a hospital or a school or a cultural institution or something, and it needs to remain in the district. They need to know that too, right? So this what section is just for you to say why you're here and what you want in that map, in the new map. Okay, so we know, we know who you are. We know why you're here. We know that you want whatever your community of interest or whatever your neighborhood or whatever you're testifying about to remain whole. But why does that matter? Right? So what that your neighborhood is split in half? How does that affect you? How does that affect your community? Right? And definitely, if you have any examples, any evidence to show that it affects you or your community, you'll really want to hinge on that, right? So, certainly anecdotal evidence, stories, anything like that is great. If you can pull together data of any kind, census data or data from budgets or anything to really show that being split or, again, whatever your issue is an issue, that's really helpful because it becomes hard to refute, right? If you show evidence of your point, then it's harder for the commission to ignore the claims that you're making. And then you want to end with specifically how you want the commission to resolve the issue, right? What specifically do you want the commission to do? And I think this is really kind of the heart of the testimony. I've heard a commissioner say, boundaries. What we need to hear from the public is what they want the boundaries as, right? So again, it's one thing to say, keep old story together, but that may mean something very different for a commissioner who may or may not be familiar than it does to you, right? And so specifically saying, please make the, whatever border XYZ street, so they know exactly what you're asking and exactly, what you're thinking the district should look like in specific geographic terms. One thing that's important to say is sometimes you hear groups arguing for what they don't want. So saying like, don't split us up. And I understand the inclination to do that, but really here you want to ask for what you want. You don't want to argue against what you don't want, right? So asking specifically, please put the boundaries of the district to this street. And then you want to say why, right? So, okay, so here's the boundary that we want. And the reason we want it there is X, Y, Z. And that's really, I think, the heart of it. That's really the most important thing to get across. Okay, so, I went through those training dates. And again, I think Victor put in a link to the website so you can copy down those dates and times yourself. If you can't testify in person, or remote, you can email in your testimony at any time. So this is the email address, publictestimony@redistricting.nyc.gov. You can email them at any time and they will read it. We strongly recommend testifying at the hearings, because at those hearings, it's all 15 commissioners. They're there. They have to listen to you. You get your 3 minutes. Whereas with the emailing, it doesn't have quite the same weight that it does in person. So if you can make it in person, we really recommend it. If you can't, say something, right? Get your voice in there somehow. Some kind of quick tips for testifying. If you haven't before, like all public speaking stuff, be concise, be to the point. You don't get a lot of time, you get 3 minutes. So you'll want to practice ahead of time and you'll want to time yourself. You want to speak clearly and make all good public speaking stuff. Speak slowly, take deep breaths, make eye contact, be polite, those sorts of things. I mentioned providing a map. So again, if you can add a map to your testimony to show exactly what you want the district to look like, that's really quite helpful. And then I guess the 2 last ones I'll point out is, one, there's strength in numbers, right? So if you go and say, the district should look like XYZ, that's great. If you and 10 neighbors go, then it's much harder to ignore, right? Because they're hearing the same thing over and over and over, that this is what the community wants their district to look like. And so we really encourage folks to get as many people out as possible. And then kind of the reverse side of that is that, if you can organize your neighbors, amazing. If you have time to create your own map, amazing. If you have time to look into kind of data and budgets and really get into the weeds, amazing. If you don't, and we all know everyone has a lot going on, say something, right? Saying something, even if it's just a few sentences, getting your voice in there somehow is far better than just not participating at all or not saying anything at all. So the final thing that I will say, and then we'll go over to Q&A, and I think we're right at time from what I understand our limit to be, is I want to point out, so I'm pulling up this document, which is the justification for why they chose the lines they did 10 years ago. And so this is the 2012 commission saying to the public, hey, here's what we chose and here's why we chose it. Now I'm going to I pulled up District 22. There's one very specific reason why I want to pull it up, but we'll read the whole thing together. So District 22 consists of Astoria, Ditmars, and Rikers. The district is an interborough district that spans Queens and Rikers, which is part of the Bronx. So again, it's the only, again, that crossover district. This is the only district that can do Queens and Bronx. Due to significant population loss in the last decade, 22 is underpopulated by almost 9%, which interestingly, we see the exact same thing this decade as well, right? You are underpopulated pretty significantly, again, by about 15,000 people or so, 14,000, I don't know percentage-wise, but because 22 borders the East River, the district moves east into the current 21 to acquire portions of East Elmhurst, right? So that's how they had to grow last time by 9%. So they did that by going east. And this time they're proposing going south, but again, it's just the proposal. You have plenty of sway. And this is the reason why I wanted to show this. So in response to public testimony, the Queensview houses are fully united in the district, right? So the reason I'm showing this, originally the Queensview houses were divided in their first preliminary plan 10 years ago. People came out and said, hey, Queensview really needs to be fully in 22, and they listened, right? Let me pull up another example of it. Let's see if 26, your neighbor. Okay, so I'll pull up a non-Queens example that I literally just got off another training. And so this is the example I was looking at there. This is Van Ness in the Bronx. So just looking at this right here, in response to public testimony, the revised plan keeps the Van Ness neighborhood in districts 13 and 15 instead of dividing the area into 3 council districts as proposed in a previous preliminary plan, right? So here, let's actually look at Van Ness. So Van Ness is up here in the Bronx, this neighborhood here, and it's split down the middle between 13 and 15, council districts 13 and 15. 10 years ago, their first plan split them into 3 districts. People came out in force. They said, hey, you can't do this to us for these reasons. Please, do X, Y, Z instead. And they listened. They didn't listen fully, right? Because as we see, they're still split in half. But at least they got to some degree what they wanted. This time, during the preliminary hearings, I'll bring up the first proposed map. Again, people from Van Ness, who I worked with plenty, came out to advocate for being fully united in District 13. And if you see, they got it, right? And so what I'm putting this on all to say is that, and I'll finally stop screen sharing, is that that public testimony really does matter. That if you've ever engaged in city government, sometimes it can feel like banging your head against a wall. If you have engaged or were paying attention to the state redistricting process, obviously that was a disaster. This doesn't have to be that. That here, everyday folks really can and historically have, when they've organized, been able to sway the final map. So with that, I hope that's encouraging for you to plug into the process. I'll happily take any questions. I think that, just so you know, you can ask questions directly on Facebook or on YouTube, and that'll filter right into me. And so you can ask that way, and we'll give just a minute or two to let folks chime in.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That's a great presentation, Dan. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
While we hope to see some people who possibly weren't aware that they could put their questions into chat in Facebook or YouTube, if for some reason also you don't have access to that, there is the email that Dan had when you can reach out to him directly, or you can reach out also to us and we can forward the information. There's the email address again. So please, it's pretty easy to remember. Public testimony at redistricting.nyc.gov for submitting testimony. To reach out to Dan directly if they have further questions. Could you give that email again?
Yep, I'm putting it in our chat, and Victor, you can bump it over. But just to say it, my email address is dkaminski@citizensunion.org. and I think it'll probably pop up in your chats in a moment.
But one thing that I've noticed is that you mentioned that there was very little outreach from Astoria in the initial public hearings. I think a lot of that had to do with actually people being aware of the situation. I'm also interested in the fact that you said over the last 20 years, we've just been losing population. The last couple of
I mean, this is 2 back-to-back cycles where you're underpopulated. I don't have the 03 numbers off the top of my head, but yeah, correct. For 2 back-to-back cycles, you've needed to grow.
And I remember also that at the 2010 census, there was a huge issue over undercounting when there were accusations that the census did not count a bunch of the immigrant populations. We are traditionally first landing in America immigrant population here. So that's changing now quite a bit. The demographics are changing. We're getting now a lot of younger and youthful Americans, sort of the same people that started in East Village and to Williamsburg, to Greenpoint, and they've worked their way up here. So this area is changing a lot. And I would be interested in one thing while we're waiting to see if some questions come by. Briefly, what was your take from the state issue? I know that we had a debate in June, and that question came up.
Yeah.
And, one of the biggest issues was the actual, how the commission that they created was structured.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was structured to fail.
A little bit, yeah.
So,
I mean, having even so for folks unaware, let me back up and kind of talk about what happened, just in case you're unsure. So historically, at the state level, how redistricting happened was it was drawn. The lines were drawn by a committee called Lat 4, which was made of elected officials of themselves. In 2014, New Yorkers voted a new constitutional amendment to empower an independent redistricting commission with the idea that legislators should not be the ones to control the lines that they are running in. So that's the basic idea. It passed, I forget the percentage, but pretty significantly. And this was the first cycle that we've done that process. By contrast with council, this is the 4th time we've done this council process, so it's much more kind of well-oiled machine. And how this new process at the state level was supposed to go was it empowered 10 individuals, through appointments, 10 individuals supposed to be, in theory, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 2 neutral people. That was the 10-person body, and that 10-person body was supposed to draw the lines and follow a whole process. After they would draw the first maps, if those maps got rejected or send them into the legislature, if the legislature didn't like it, they could reject them, send them back to the independent commission. Independent redistricting commission could try again, draw them again, send them back into the legislature. If the legislature rejected them the second time, then the legislature at that point could take control of the process, redraw the maps, but the maps could not deviate more than 2% from the maps that were submitted from the Independent Redistricting Commission. That's how that process was supposed to look. What happened instead was really, really a mess. So at the starting point, instead of it being 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 2 independents, it was 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. They could not agree on a set of maps, so they submitted a Democratic map and a Republican map. The maps were rejected by the state legislature, and instead of sending it back to the commission, at that point, the state legislature took control of the process and drew their own maps. The maps deviated far more than 2% from the maps submitted by the independent commission. And so for a variety of reasons, the 2% thing, the fact that it didn't follow the process, and the fact that it was deemed a gerrymander, a judge struck down those new lines, even though the process had already gone in motion, petitioning had already happened, et cetera. And they brought in a special master to draw the lines, singular individual, PhD guy named Jonathan Service out of Pennsylvania. And that's what happened. And he drew the lines for Senate and Congress, state Senate and Congress. State Assembly was not named in the original lawsuit that struck down those old lines. And so State Assembly, even though it followed the same process, was allowed to go forward in the June primary. They then separated the primaries. So Senate and Congress are happening in August. Please vote August 23rd. About that. But so that's happening. And then State Assembly will be drawn for 2 years from now. So that is the mess that occurred. It was truly a disaster in just about every way. In terms of how to fix it, which, Richard, that's kind of how I'm garnering your question. That's a pretty big question that we have 10 years to figure out. So, the next time this cycle will happen is 10 years from now. I genuinely believe that they will not follow the process that just happened. I have to imagine that there will be a new amendment. Keep in mind, constitutional amendments at the state level, how they get passed is they have to pass 2 consecutive state legislatures and then pass voters. So it's, even though 10 years, it sounds like a very long time from now, honestly, people have to start working on it soon to create proposals on what should happen, because 2 consecutive legislatures, that already gets us into 2027, give or take, right? So it'll probably be up for conversation in not too long, considering how badly it went. Certainly, though, the point you're making about having an even number of people is never a good idea, and having bipartisan, generally not a great move. So nonpartisan is, in general, we prefer better. We have not come out with a proposal, though, so I don't want to speak on behalf of the organization. But in general, you think of Board of Elections and other such things, we prefer nonpartisan. So who knows what's going to happen, what the best proposal is. I think there's going to be probably a lot of reflection over the next year to consider proposals of how best to fix this cycle and, what to do moving forward.
Yeah, it affected us significantly here. First of all, the brand new Senate district, District 59, which did not exist before. After years of being represented by Senator Generis, we're now going to have a new senator. And after years and years of being represented, as far back as I can remember, by Carolyn Maloney in the Congress, we are now represented by Ocasio-Cortez. And of course, Carolyn Maloney is going through her own trials and tribulations in Manhattan now.
So you all have a pretty good idea of how redistricting can really shake up representation and how it affects folks.
Good. Well, listen, I think we should go over reiterate the emails for Dan if you want to. I think that, yes, he put it in the chat. Appreciate the time. I know that it's 8:30 now, so I think that's a good time to let Dan recuperate. Okay.
Once I started talking, it went away. I had no coughing fits.
You did really good.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. It's a subject that people don't think about too much, but I hope that people that are listening, one thing I want everybody to remember: if you were listening and you want to go over it again, or you want to forward the information to somebody else, this is sitting on our website and also on YouTube. The link is good. You can forward the link, the YouTube and Facebook links, to anybody you want. We will also be putting it out on our social media so that you can go over this again if there's any points that you forgot. And also there will be, again, the email to Dan to clarify anything. So we greatly appreciate it. We know it's August and we know everybody's sitting at the beach or whatever they're doing. We totally understand it. Plus, we also know there's a big debate tonight with the Council District 10 primary. So I know that a lot of political aficionados are probably watching that. But that being said, even if you missed the live event, it is still living out there online and you can check it out. So we hope that you do that and you share it with everybody that you know. Let's make sure that Astoria is properly represented in the upcoming public hearing at the Museum of the Moving Image on the 16th. I think that's very, very important. We are going through a lot of changes in the district. Make your voices heard. So, Dan, thank you. Victor, thank you so much for doing your wonderful, great job, as you always do, hosting us. And see everybody on September 14th. Presenters to be determined. Thank you so much.